everyone. Welcome to Leading with Agility, the show that uses the world around us to explore how leadership can be inspired by agility. I'm your host, Arif, and I'm joined by...
Myself, TK, the current world record holder on Open Tabs, my browser.
That's a quite an achievement.
I know, right? Yeah, getting 32 gigs of RAM definitely helps.
Have you been certified by the Guinness World Records? Or?
In process.
Okay, good. If any listeners are out there with multiple tabs open, maybe you can write in with your number of tabs and see if you
might have to do a proper webinar on that.
Exactly, yes. See if you're beating TK's record. I don't even know what yours is, but I can guess.
Well, it's too hard to count, to be honest, Arif.
I guess that says it all.
It does.
Anyway, quite a deviation, but sorry to our listeners, that's not today's topic, tabs on TK's browser. But what we do want to be talking about is following on a little bit from last week's episode around engagement and that kind of stuff and employee recognition. Just slightly on that theme, but related and maybe different. I wanted to pick up on something a bit broader, which is this idea of employee experience and why that matters. And even more so, how do you ensure that employees are part of that conversation and are being listened to? In other words, in some corners of the HR world, shall we say, there is a view that employees should be treated like customers. And I wonder what we think about that. So something to touch on, hopefully, in today's episode, TK.
Indeed, many views there, right? I remember how Richard Branson said that, you shouldn't ask your customers, you should ask your employees.
There we go. Maybe prescient in some ways. And of course, the flip side of all of this is what happens when employees aren't listened to in terms of their expectations, needs, etc. And what is the responsibility of leaders in crafting and creating an employee experience that works for the organization? Plenty of questions that I think
Plenty of questions, and even though they might seem to have an obvious answer, there's always more than meets the eye.
This is not Transformers, but yes, Optimus Prime had a good line for sure. Let's start with, I suppose, the broader employee experience, what that is, where does that come from, and why that's important, I suppose. And then I think I'd like to move on to leaders, as our listeners, I'm sure, would expect, thinking about their responsibilities, what role they play, and how they can have an impact or affect the employee experience. TK.
Yep. Let's do that.
So employee experience, what is it? Where do we start? I know that, there's perception that we're talking about how employees, physical workspace and, the what they've got access to in terms of tools, equipment, all of that can be considered as part of the experience that an employee has. And I guess, with any so-called experience, a lot of it is down to first impression. So I'm sure it does start and has an impact from the time you onboard as a employee in an organization. But I think there's something broader to it, which is the culture of an organization having a direct impact on the employee's experience. So it's a live, continual, I suppose, variable that needs to be attended to, right? It has to be looked after. It has to be cultivated. And there's got to be some responsibility around who does that. Is it HR's job? As I was listening to this week at a conference I attended, is it the HR's responsibility in creating the culture that affects the employee's experience, or is it something that needs to be co-created?
Well, I guess, to be honest, I think the interesting thing is any culture will profoundly impact the employee experience, I guess, right? Whatever it is. And obviously, HR plays a large portion. In fact, at the beginning of your employee life cycle in an organization, you do have a lot of HR touch points. These people are, one of the first people you see, actually, even being, in the process of recruitment, then onboarding, etc., and so on. But what's really interesting is one would think that the role theoretically diminishes through the life cycle, but maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, through the employee life cycle, right? As in, onboarding happens, everything's sorted out, and then here you go, we're off. You're off with your manager now, and we'll leave you alone, kind of thing. So yeah, okay, fair point. But why does it matter? I think, right?
That's a big question. Yeah.
That's a good, and I think a positive employee experience naturally would lead to you would expect, and this is what research suggests, more engaged, productive employees. Has an impact on the quality of work, and also improves, as you said, exactly as you said, TK, with Richard Branson's quote, it improves how the company then interacts with its customers. I mean, we can go through all those in turn, perhaps, and just delve into them slightly. In terms of the engaged, productive employees, disengaged employees, cost money, effectively, don't they? They cost the organization money. They're not going to affect the productivity of organization when you're not engaged and you're not motivated, etc. As I know, we have touched on this before, but this is what the research suggests, doesn't it?
Well, I think the interesting thing here, absolutely, in terms of the basics of motivation, what it reminds me of is the famous saying that people rarely quit their jobs; they usually quit their bosses. So I'm just, obviously reflecting on the huge role of the direct manager, the leader that, a person is looking up to.
Exactly.
For most of the time, it's such a profound one. And I think, nothing that an organization can do might overshadow it.
Yes. Just a bit of data as I want to get to the leadership point. There's a lot to be said there. Just a bit of data. Something I picked up this week. Engagement over time, just Culture Amp, an organization that maps all this stuff around employee engagement. They've been measuring this since 2017. Worldwide, according to their research, and they surveyed 6,000 odd organizations, around engagement hovered around 71% up until the pandemic. It went up post-pandemic or during the pandemic. I think for various reasons. You can imagine why. What's interesting is that post-pandemic, there's been now a dip, and we're now coming back to what it was pre-pandemic. So employee engagement has not increased massively, and in fact, it's on a downward trajectory. Now, according to them, and I think I would agree, there are probably multitude of reasons for that. You look at economic climate, we look at global political upheavals and changes and what have you, and we can just look at Europe right now, elections here in the UK, etc., all of that. So there's a lot of worldwide,
is a good term, yes,
right, factors that can affect how people feel generally. But yeah, it's just an interesting data point that employee engagement is on a downward trajectory worldwide as a de facto anyway, regardless of whatever is going on in an organization.
And I think, it's if you look at the historical data, I would say that it will probably reach a certain threshold, and then it will bounce back, and then it will reach a certain ceiling, and it will bounce back. And I think, overall, I think the social contract of employment is fluctuating, constantly is, right? So you get a certain engagement. And it's interesting, like, you've mentioned the engagement increasing in the pandemic as work being something that, was a stabilizing factor when many people obviously were working from home and being locked down. You would see how important the experience of work was for, people's well-being. And now things change.
Yeah. The second, we've talked about engagement, productivity, and there's some stuff, data we just shared with you. But one of the other benefits of a positive employee experience, high quality of work, right? So there is evidence that suggests that a happy brain sees more possibilities and is more creative. And that's from a psychologist and happiness expert, Sean Aker. So there you go.
Like the sound of that.
Yeah. So there you go. So, if you're happy, you're engaged with what's happening at work, you're going to be more creative and more, You'll be seeing more opportunities for doing things differently.
Well,
Innovative,
Arif, it's an interesting one to equate happiness with engagement or engagement with happiness. Can you be engaged and not happy, right? Because you're so, maybe, I'm not saying angry, but focused on achieving a result, even through very determined effort. And it might not make you happy, but maybe you're stubborn. That's maybe a detour, but just saying.
No, it's a good point. So that's and then the third benefit is around this improved customer relations, the Richard Ranson quote.
Yes.
Now, on this one, interestingly, some research on that is that this is IBM, in fact, found themselves that employee engagement explains 2/3 of our client experience scores. So if we're able to, according to them, increase client satisfaction by 5 points on whatever project, whatever they're working on, they see an extra 20% in revenue on average. So there's a clear business impact. That's fast. That's significant data.
It is. Reminds me of a story I can share. I've been working in quite a few banks somehow. I don't know.
Yes.
It's never been my ambition, but it ended up this way. And I worked at the one that I will not name.
Okay.
It was okay.
Yeah.
And I actually also have a personal and company account at that bank.
Right.
And,
okay.
As I was working in an office, the branch was downstairs. And I had to get something done.
Yeah.
So I went to the
Admin.
branch and, went to the wonderful teller lady and started talking and then I showed my badge.
Okay.
Her attitude changed completely.
Wow.
Started complaining about, the bank and everything. Like,
oh dear.
I was no longer a customer. I was possibly some person that she can share her frustration with. It was a good service, no doubt about it, but definitely I had a different experience. It reminds me of that.
Interesting, isn't it? Perceptions and really, really fascinating. So this all brings to this point, I think, about we touched on it earlier, creating the right culture and who's responsible for that. And we mentioned, is it down to HR? Well, I think the answer emphatically, I think, is no. The general view now is that this should be a co-created experience. Leaders need to work with their employees and listen to them, engage them, and take on board what they have to say about the experience that they want to create, and therefore the culture in an organization that they want to create. Now,
absolutely so. But wait, Arif, there's more. I think, this is interesting to explore maybe the key touch points and the moments of truth where the people team is involved. And they are important moments, right? Recruitment, onboarding, annual appraisals, raises, any, perhaps disciplinary actions or difficult things that might happen. So I think, even though you're absolutely right that it's the main job of leaders, we can't forget about the very important touch points that the people team have. And many people perceive the organization through the lens of these moments of truth.
Yeah.
Right? No. How are you treated, for instance, when you're being offboarded?
Yes.
Do you even have an exit interview? Does anyone listen? Does anyone care?
Gosh. I have some stories on that.
Oh, I'm sure you do.
I think worth sharing, in terms of that just on that point about exit, onboarding, etc. I remember having an exit interview in one company, but before I tell that story, I actually got involved in the exit interview process at a much smaller scale up many years ago. Essentially, we had a situation where there was a senior staff member whose behavioral patterns, unfortunately, were causing a not so harmonious team environment, shall we say.
The festival of euphemisms.
Yeah. And it was apparent that this senior manager essentially was the cause for what was going on. And two of his team actually announced not so long after each other that they wanted to resign and leave. So I actually, spoke to this senior chap, his managers. He was a director, effectively. I said, look, I know this isn't working out. There's clearly a relationship issue here, and it's creating a toxic environment. staff are not engaged. There's clearly a problem. They want to leave. Would you mind if I took part in the exit process? And he actually said, yeah, fine, no problem. I was independent in so much as I was not part of that team at all.
Yeah.
I was on the periphery. I could observe what was going on. So we ran through the exit process. They gave me all the information, how to conduct it. There was a script and there was a form and all that. And when it got to the point, or the question around your manager and your experience of your manager, both of them effectively gave that as the core reason for them wanting to leave. And they gave details as to events and occurrences and things that happened in their
nasty
dynamic.
Things to hear,
yeah, it wasn't great. It wasn't great at all. And I not being HR, professionally trained HR, fine. Just being, I suppose, human, I felt so sad and disappointed that they had got to this place that they were never able to openly share what really was going on enough that they could get it sorted out, and instead felt the easiest thing was just to leave. And you said it earlier, that managers are the cause of people leaving. And I've seen it. This is an example, real life example. I saw that with my own eyes. I was part of it. So
you were a positive aspect of the, even though this was a difficult employee experience for these people leaving, at least you being, a pseudo member of a people team were there for them.
Yeah, I think that helped. I think they felt there was a degree of them feeling, okay, we're being listened to. It's a bit late, but we're being listened to, right? And I did promise that, look, we need to do something. I will take action on it. And I did. I had a chat with the senior director. I said, look, here's the feedback. Here's the data. Clearly, this can't go on. Otherwise, we're going to, there'll be more attrition. We'll lose more members of that team. We're already under pressure as it is. Can't happen. So I think that really shook him. And they did have then their own one-to-ones, went through some performance review process and, agreed some goals and objectives. And then he actually came to me, this manager, and said, look, can we have a chat, Arif? And I know you've been involved in the exit, blah, blah, blah. And to be fair to him, he opened up and was quite apologetic about his own behaviour. And I'm sure that was prompted by his own manager giving him not so many words of, what's going to happen if he doesn't sort himself out. But, despite that, there was an element of contrition of, my behaviour wasn't great, blah, blah. I'd like you to help me, whatever. And so he was open to change. So
decent story.
Yeah, it was a good. Yeah, it was a nice way. In some ways, it was nice to end like that, but it was also disappointing that it had to end like that for those two individuals who decided to leave. But I think this goes back to why I'm saying, if you're not creating an environment where it's okay for employees to speak up about what's not working for them. Right, and this goes to psychological safety. Yes, we've touched on this before, but it's critical. Then how are you ever going to get real data, real insights about, what to do to improve the employee experience? It's simple as that, really, isn't it?
Well, the other question is possibly you could measure and find ways to be able to understand your current employee experience, right?
Okay.
And and it goes maybe to something I've talked about this week on my live show, The Coach on the Rocks. Shameless plug, even if it's the same company, the same us. But the thing is, we rarely have the space to do that, and we rarely try to listen to genuine employee feedback. And it's just interesting that not many companies have systems and mechanisms to do this in a way that's reliable.
And just on that, a data point for you. According to Slack the business, their own report, 66% of execs reported that they've been designing their post-pandemic workforce policies. Check this out, with little to no input from their employees. It's like, come on, guys, what is this? I mean, why? That is more than 2/3 not interested in what their employees have to say when it comes to designing policies and the future of the organization.
It's such an incredible moment to live through. I mean, not the health crisis, sadly, and, unfortunately, many people lost their loved ones and etc.
Yeah.
But the thing is, how it reshaped the contract, the psychological and social contract of employment for so many people. People really changed and the way they think about work. And yeah.
But yeah, so there we go. So you said TK surveying, you mentioned that. And what have you found out about that? What kind of insights have you got around? I can share some stuff, but you started the point, so I don't know if you want.
Well, I did start the point, right? And
point.
I think, as always, being myself, I'm looking to see what's the challenge. Why, even though these surveys are done, we have such a low confidence in the results, and it's basically because I think there's two reasons for that. Most sadly, and not in organizations, and I don't want to make a sweeping generalization here, but in many organizations that I've seen and heard about, people don't think anything will change based on these surveys.
Yeah,
that's number one.
It. Yeah,
and obviously this diminishes motivation, the whole experience, and the trust in leaders. Watch my show from this week. Second of all, but which I didn't talk about on my show because I forgot, I'll tell you another story. So as I'm scrolling through LinkedIn, which is what I sometimes do, I found a lady and a member of a people team, but also a content creator like myself. And she was talking about, if I'm being asked to give feedback on an exit interview, what should I say, right? There's like a Q&A with this wonderful lady. And she said, no, just say everything was great and leave. Why would you spoil a relationship? And I was like picking my jaw off the floor. I was like, what the hell? Why would you say that? How the hell are you depriving the organization from honest feedback just because it's like, pack your bags and leave, right? It's probably best not to stir the water. I was like, how can you say that on LinkedIn? Well, you can't get banned by thought police on LinkedIn. You get banned by other things. But it was very surprising that someone with this experience gave this advice. I would imagine that someone like this would really want, as you said, to get the feedback. And you actually provided a great story, even though a nasty one, of someone actually taking the point to change. So this is possible, even in these difficult situations.
Nice. And on that note, let's take a short break and explore where we go next with the conversation about maybe thinking what happens when all this goes wrong with managers, as we've just been describing, and what can you do about it. So see you in a moment. Are you looking to expand your leadership knowledge? Well, join us for a live LinkedIn webinar on Tuesday, 18th June at 5 p.m. Together with our friends from Project 23, a leading UK DEI consultancy, we'll be hosting a panel discussion exploring how leaders must embrace their fears in order to stay relevant in today's workplace. Simply visit our website and scroll to the bottom of our homepage to register. And if you're listening to this episode after the event, you can catch all of our webinar recordings on our YouTube channel. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for sticking with the conversation. We were talking about employee experience, but more specifically talking about managers and their role in the whole surveying, getting data, and understanding what's not working, and that kind of stuff. So TK, where should we go next? I mean, I think there's some other things around, just to build on your story. Mm-hmm. I was listening yesterday to a chief exec describing how, and you mentioned, I think, or if you didn't, I'll mention it, low trust, and honesty being two critical things around this topic. Essentially that, look, if you are not constantly open, honest about exactly what's going on from the top to your organization, to your employees, you're obviously going to create a low trust atmosphere. The side effect of that is when it comes to employee experience, there is no motivation or no, is it motivation? There is a word I'm looking for, but I can't fit. Well, there isn't a need, I suppose, for employees to raise concerns and talk about what's not working around their employee experience. And so them not speaking up means that feedback, they think, well, feedback's not going to get action, so why should I bother speak up? So I won't say anything.
Creates a vicious cycle.
And then you're in a vicious cycle. Exactly. Bingo. So that was another interesting side point to what you were saying earlier, right?
Although, as you know, Arif, we've been to a different conference too, and we've talked about cross-cultural communication. And there are cultures which obviously have their own organizations where direct communication and being, as you say, honest is not necessarily the natural form of, communicating. I mean, I'm not saying honest. I'm saying direct and transparent. All right. I think people around the world are naturally honest. Yes.
Yeah.
Straightening that out.
And I think on this leadership point, some other data again, there has been in the past year or so. There's been some data coming out again. This is Culture Amp stuff around how employees perceive their leaders, and specifically when it comes to this point about being kept informed and being communicated regularly about what's happening in an organization and what challenges the organizations face, whatever it might be. The perception that leaders have on them doing that in a good way has dropped around by 5% in the last year or so. So, and across all other kind of categories around how employees perceive their leaders, there has been some drop. So I don't know why particularly they didn't tell me that when I was listening to them, and I haven't delved into the report raw data myself yet, but there's just some fresh insight, TK.
I have hypotheses. I think something's going on. So recent times, obviously, you would say the economy hasn't been growing as it might be. So, there's tension in terms of job security and layoffs. There's one.
Yeah,
I think you've previously mentioned the post-pandemic workforce policy, possibly around hybrid work and such, being constructed without much input from the employees themselves.
Yeah.
So you would imagine that could have this effect on perception of leaders.
A couple of things I like the sound of this. I'll share ideas, recommendations for leaders to remove that perception or reduce that perception of them not communicating. Number one, obviously communicate regularly, but also, I think for leaders, communicate across all platforms. Not all employees consume their information from you in the same way, from the same medium.
Intriguing.
Right. So not everyone consumes just by emails. You may need to put town halls on. You may need to use, you might have a social media platform of your own in an organization. I was made aware of a tool yesterday called Work Vivo. It's like,
I've heard about it, yeah.
You heard about it. It's like a Facebook-ish type thing for
There's
employees.
more tools like that, but essentially,
right. They're quite popular now. They are increasingly being used by organizations. So, there's multiple platforms out there. So from a leadership point of view, you can't rely on one and don't expect that if you send an email out, everyone's going to listen. So you hold multiple town halls, use that social media platform if that's what you've got. Use the email system if you've also got that. Use multiple platforms. Communicate regularly. But also, employees don't want to just hear about the raw elements of the business outcomes in terms of revenue, profit, growth. Yes, that's important. And maybe especially important to the CFO because he's always looking at that. And that's critical in terms of really looking at whether the business is moving in the right direction. I'm sure. But for employees, generally, there's more that they're interested in, right? They're looking at all sorts of other aspects. What's happening with the organization? Where are we going? What's the vision? What the goals are? Where are we heading to next? What's in it for me? Or, how are you going to incentivize me to keep with you on your journey of wherever you're taking us, Mr. Leader or Mrs. Leader or Miss Leader, Ms. Leader, well, you know what I mean. Sorry. And I think that those are some key thoughts for leaders, if you're listening, around how to communicate and what to be communicating and how often to be communicating.
Yeah, maybe host a communal meal and sit down with your. I mean, yeah, you mentioned all these mediums and media, and I thought about how at the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, how Biden came to the soldiers actually in eastern Poland and sat down with them for a meal. And they had a pizza. And, it's like this kind of leadership communication, being really close to people, I guess that's another medium.
Well, I mean, I know on a previous podcast, for those of you who are regular listeners, you may recall. But if you're new to the show, check out our episode on Anita Roddick.
Yes.
We recorded that a while back, and we referenced her approach to employee communication. She called it belly-to-belly communication. She was never a fan of passing edicts down the hierarchy. She was a strong believer that the leader themselves need to be right in the front face of the communication. So if there are bad news like redundancies, they need to be on the shop floor essentially with the employees, telling them what's going on and communicating, clearly and openly.
Another idea, Arif, sorry, because you've actually triggered a story that I want to say. So some of you might have used, it's not as popular as it were, and not as flashy and chic, which is a tool called Evernote. And at one point, there was a very industrious and, I think, outspoken CEO they had, Peter Levin or Phil. The guy, basically, what he did is they had a coffee station at the office, and he has taken one day of his week every week to be a barista there.
Oh, a barista. Okay, nice.
Yeah, so he served coffee at the office.
Oh, that, interesting.
I'm sure was an interesting platform of communication.
Yeah. He probably got so much insight as to,
I'm sure he did.
The vibe. What's going on?
Left.
What's not being said? You know what I mean? Or maybe they just stayed away from him when he was serving and never turned up.
But I can imagine myself,
That's hilarious.
That's an interesting one, right? Yeah. Being like a person passing meals, and like this, maybe even being a very practical aspect of servant leadership, how it can touch our basic instincts and how it improves communication. You might think I'm a bit of a hippie here and so on, but platforms and media.
It's funny you say that. There used to be that program. I don't know if it comes on where it was. I think it was called Undercover Boss.
This one, yeah. Well,
it's classic, but that was the classic one, and it's great entertainment. But just from a leadership point of view, the premise I think was absolutely brilliant, because you got leaders who, have no, or in many cases, you watch, if you've ever watched the show, listeners, please go, you might find old episodes on YouTube or something. It is absolutely brilliant, because the premise is simple. They basically get a leader to dress up as an employee. So if they're in a retail business, right? So they'll get the leader to the CEO, whoever it is, someone on the board, maybe a senior person, dress up in the uniform of their company and work as a shop assistant, right? And 9 times out of 10, the fellow employees do not have a clue who that person is. They just think it's another
amazing thing, right?
Yeah. They just think it's another employee who's turned up. And so it's unfiltered. They get the unfiltered perspective of what exactly is going on. And there's been occasions where that hasn't worked, where an employee is clearly, been behaving in a not appropriate manner. And then the boss reveals themselves. It's like, sorry, you're fired. That's very rare. But what tends to happen,
unless there's this show with Trump.
Yeah. What tends to happen is it's like, wow, I did not know this is what's really happening in my organization, and I didn't know what you are going through as employees, and I didn't appreciate the challenges, and now I have a better insight, blah, blah, blah. And I think it's the entertainment version of Gemba.
Yes, but wait, I have a different maybe take on it.
Go on.
Which, yes, all of what you've said is happening, and this is the face of it. But if you maybe look at the back, there's a different insight I'm having. Like 9 out of 10 times, a person that's supposed to help the organization find its vision, help the employees have purpose, guide the organization, and make sure to model the right values, is so unrecognizable that he can just pass as, a new employee.
I know.
On the shop floor.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's crazy. And so, fascinating. If you have time, check it out. But yeah, let's go back to what we've been talking about around employee experience and management responsibility or leadership responsibility, etc. Right? And I think as we head towards the latter part of the episode, I had some thoughts around, from an agile leadership point of view, what does that mean? Where does the link come from? I think for me, we talk a lot about reflection. We talk about a lot about leaders needing to reflect. And one aspect of reflection for me is interesting. Another data point, one-to-ones. So managers having one-to-ones with their employees. Now, data now suggests that and this is a huge variance, where a manager has 0 one-to-ones with their employees, attrition rates can hit about 26%. But if they move that down to regular 2 weekly one-to-ones, that drops down to a very low 8% in terms of attrition. That's a massive difference. So
I'm just like, for myself, the one-to-one, the structured time you have with a person looking up to you for leadership is the most important tool. Hearing that someone has 0 one-to-ones makes me cringe so much. You can probably hear it through the microphone.
Well, there you go. So the point about reflection for me is I think this is a really interesting way to conduct reflection, because in that one-to-one setting, the manager can reflect on, yes, the relationship. The employee hopefully can reflect on what's working for them, what isn't. But I would like to think that there is an opportunity for humbleness, humility from the manager point of view to reflect on what's not working for them. I'm not, feeling that the team environment is great, and I'm wondering what we can do about it, and I'd like to change something around that. What can you do to help me? Whatever that conversation is, I think there's something there that they can both be in some kind of conversation, manager, line report, around reflecting and improving as a pair, not just about just the line report. I don't know what you think, DK.
Absolutely agree. Although the usual social contract of employment dictates that the leader needs to initiate it.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Well, of course that is true. But by them initiating and showing the initiative and proactiveness to do it on a regular basis, I would like to think that would be naturally reciprocated.
I think in most cases it will.
Yeah, in most cases it will. And I think not only would it be naturally reciprocated, I think then it creates the atmosphere of, if I am going to hold this, I'm going to do it regularly, and I'm going to be open and honest in my communication, like we talked about earlier. Here's what's happening. Here's what's going on. Here's what I'm hearing. Here are the challenges the organization got. Here's the latest on business outcomes, whatever it is. Here's what I think you can do to help me and the business. I think that there's a growingness, it will naturally impact the employee's willingness, to then talk about, okay, here's what I'm not happy with. Here's what I think I need better. My employee experience is like this, and can you help me, manager, with X, Y, Z, or whatever it is, right? So the willingness to share openly increases. That's what I think would happen. Well, that's what I believe anyway.
And the leader, if you're trying to tell me you don't have the time for your one-to-ones, I would say, well, that's the one thing you should have time for, and nothing else is more important.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. What else? I think that on that, feedback we talked about, you mentioned briefly surveying, right? You mentioned briefly understanding and assessing the employees' needs and experiences and what's happening, what's working, what isn't. And we have obviously talked at length about what happens when you don't then take that into account and the impact that has. And we've talked about attrition rates and all of that. So I think that, I would like to end on this point that the real advice here is, if you're getting feedback, action it and don't delay. Action it sooner rather than later, because the more delay you create in actioning any feedback you get from your employees, the trust just, starts dropping off, And you're not going to get that back. You're probably going to just lose that employee into a case of, you know what, I'm leaving because I'm not going to listen to, I'm not enjoying it here, and I don't think they care. So I'm off, right?
And if you can't action the feedback for whatever reason, because it sometimes happens, just be honest and say it, right? Say that you acknowledge the feedback, that you might be grateful for the feedback, because I think we always need to be, because, if it's given from a genuine purpose of care. And if, you don't have an intention to do anything about it now, or you can't for various reasons, just don't hide it under the rug. Just say, hey, that's and that.
Here's the challenges. Yeah, I think it's the policy of openness, transparency, like that chief exec I listened to yesterday was talking about. Be open about what is going on. Don't hide anything. Really critical if you want to have that positive employee experience and ultimately that positive culture. Right. Well, I mean, that's kind of all I wanted to talk about, TK. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to summarize our episode today. Close things off.
I think not. I think we've managed to close everything off. And as always, if I come up with more thoughts, just open your browser and type tk.coach. 9:45 British summertime every weekday.
Every weekday. There you go. A shameless plug there. Excellent. Well, with that, thank you to all our listeners once again for sticking with us and listening to our episode today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please, as always, do give us a like or a subscribe.
Or some stars.
And some stars.
5.
Exactly. On your podcast player, whatever it is you're using. And feel free to pass on the podcast to any of your fellow colleagues and friends who may benefit from listening to us.
Or the enemies you want to improve.
Exactly. And with that, thank you very much. And we'll see you at our next episode. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.